Hello and welcome to the Uncultured Nerd Show. My name is Maeve and I'm an uncultured nerd who also loves to soak in nostalgia. Recently, I've rewatched Quest for Camelot and the original Spiderwick Chronicles. And I continue my childhood rewind journey, this time with another 90s animated flick which I grew up with and have fond memories of, but I'm not sure will live up to the hype I've created. Mainly because of my father's reaction when I told him I would be rewatching it.
The music and the adventure of a place worlds away from anything you've ever seen. Ferngully.
Apparently, I've watched this film a lot. Like, my dad still has a majority of the script seared onto his memory. Ferngully was one of 15 or 20 burned DVDs my family had when I was little, which would go through rotations of being my favorite, so one month we would watch Ferngully every night. The next it would be the BBC Chronicles of Narnia, and the next Charlotte's Web 2. From what I remember, I thought the fairies were pretty, the villain was creepy, the environmental message was inspiring, and the bat was very, very funny. I'm guessing the fairies are still pretty hot, and given that Tim Curry is playing the villain, I still have high hopes in that department, but I'm not expecting the humor to live up to expectations, and I'm really expecting the environmental message to be extremely oversimplified. But the only way to find out if I'm right is to actually watch it, so let's dive in with this episode's Unhinged Recap! So apparently in the past, humans and fairies lived together in harmony, then everything changed when the pollution monster attacked. Luckily, one of the fairies, Magi, trapped the pollution monster Hexus in a tree, but not before the humans ran away and are now presumed dead. For thousands of years, the fairies lived happily in Ferngully, but Krista, the maybe princess/chief's daughter, is longing to know/do more than just her magic lessons with Magi. She spends her free time with her maybe boyfriend looking over the forest canopy at the land she isn't allowed to go to. While up there, she runs into Batty, an escaped lab experiment who tells her humans still exist, so she goes to try to find them, but instead she gets more than she bargained for with a giant leveler. Working for the leveler is Zach, who Krista comes across and saves from a falling tree by shrinking him, but not before he marks the Hexus tree to be cut down, causing Hexus to be released. Of course, the first thing Hexus does is explain how evil he is through song form while sending the leveler straight towards Ferngully. Meanwhile, Krista teaches Zach about the forest, but Zach keeps his job a secret, which definitely won't be revealed in a third act breakup. Pips doesn't seem too happy about how close Krista and Zach are getting, but don't worry, Krista finally figures out the destruction coming their way is because of humans and that Zach was part of it the whole time. The fairies prepare their home for the attack while Magi, I guess, sacrifices her life force to help the forest and leaves Krista as the new magic leader. Zach, Batty, and Pips work together to turn off the machine, cutting off Hexus' power supply, but I guess he had some backup power since he comes back in skeleton form, but never fear, Krista plants a seed inside of him which literally takes over his body from the inside. Luckily, Krista is fine despite being eaten and returns Zach to his normal size so he can spread the message of conservation and Ferngully remains safe until the direct-to-DVD sequel. Okay, so I think we're in the Quest for Camelot category for this movie, in that I loved it as a child, but it hasn't really lived up to my internal hype. Yeah, this whole picture is a bit of a mess, and a very fast-paced mess, in that this sort of feels like a SparkNotes version of the movie for quite a while, and with that very fast pacing, a lot of key world building and character exposition is skipped over. In regards to the world building, I have a big question for the filmmakers. Why in the world is this thing set in Australia? For real, what's the point when there is zero attempt to cast any Australians as characters? Why does everyone have an American accent? I mean, I could maybe understand the fairies not having Australian accents, but given that Zach is established to be from Byron Bay in New South Wales, why does he sound like a guy from California? And why are the workers New Yorker stereotypes? Even in good movies, this is always a huge distraction for me, but since this one isn't even that good to begin with and actually draws attention to it with the license and the inclusion of native Australian species, Aboriginal art, and the fact that Mount Warning is a real place in Australia, it's a big distraction which could have been easily fixed in casting. And not even all the actors would need to be changed. If you just make the workers Australian and have them say Zach is from California, that would have worked fine, but nope, just a complete disconnect between setting and characters. And tied to the odd world building choices, the character establishment and character exposition in the beginning of the film makes very little sense. Krista apparently spends so much time with Magi learning magic, but judging from the opening scene, she isn't really invested in learning and leaves as soon as she hears Pips outside. So yeah, that's not very consistent with what Pip says later. Also, Magi is supposedly teaching her about the forest and magic, so why does it seem like Krista has never been to the canopy before? They basically did the Little Mermaid coming to the surface thing, but they didn't establish that it was taboo to go to the canopy. And when she's looking around, she's doing it like she's never seen any of this stuff before, and then apparently knows nothing about the outside world, like she doesn't know what smoke is, but she's learning all this stuff from Magi. So why wouldn't Magi have taught taught her any of this stuff. We're not even 10 minutes in and already none of this makes sense, but don't worry, there's a lot more. My big question, how exactly does magic work in this place? Are Maggie and Krista the only ones who can use magic? Is that why they're the only ones that glow blue and everyone else glows green? Well, that was never said, and I don't know how a child could figure that out if I can't as a legal adult. Apparently this was based on a book, so maybe it's explained better there, but in the film itself, I'm unclear how this world works. So yeah, I'm noticing these things not making sense as an adult, but I never noticed them as a child. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was not very smart back then, and I'm a little bit smarter now, allegedly. But I think there's another factor. The film's breakneck pacing. For the first half hour, I don't think there was a single scene that lasted more than a few minutes, and sometimes a lot less. I did not expect Batty to show up as soon as he did. I guess I assumed it would be like Aladdin, where he showed up a third of the way through, but nope, 10 minutes in. And speaking of Aladdin, there are some very clear comparisons that can be made, but wouldn't you know it, both films were in production at the exact same time and came out the same year. In fact, Ferngully came out a full 6 months before Aladdin and also hired Robin Williams before he was ever even approached by Disney. So yes, this is not a ripoff of the Disney Genie, but it still kind of feels like one, and I think it's just because they are so similar, but one is just infinitely worse. The Genie had a lot more to him than just humor. We felt his want for freedom, and we had complete arcs by the end. Batty is just here for jokes. The Batty that starts the movie is the Batty that finishes the movie. I guess you could say he's not as fearful because he helps Zach in the final battle, but that wasn't even Batty's choice. He just got brain control to think he was something else that would fight. And while some of the jokes I do get a laugh from, they are few and far between. And then the big one, I really don't like Batty's song. I think it's passable, but it just feels unnecessary and more like an excuse to do some weird animation. Speaking of things being unnecessary and an excuse for weird animation, I give you the second song in this film's trio of character songs. This is the part of the movie I always remember skipping as a child. I don't know why, but the idea of getting eaten alive has always been a huge fear for me. It started with Little Shop of Horrors when I was 8 and has never gone away. But watching it now, I can appreciate a few things. The design of the goanna, while not being colored accurately, is both visually appealing and intimidating. These weird mud creatures, while they make no sense, are effectively creepy, and hearing Tone Loc's voice is always a plus. Although I do wish that this character had a bigger role. For some reason, I thought he would come back and have a part in the finale, but he literally comes out of nowhere, sings a song, and leaves. You had Tone Loc, one of the most recognizable voices in the industry at the time, and he's a glorified cameo. Use your Tone Loc! Now to my biggest disappointment with the movie, and it's not even the worst part of the film. It's just the part I had the highest hopes for, and it did start out great, but it took a steep dive. The villain. Even though I haven't watched the full movie since I was still in single digits, I have watched the Toxic Love clip quite a bit. I love this whole sequence. The animation is both creepy and creative. The lyrics are pretty good with a couple of weird lines here and there, but we all know the star of this show is the one and the only Tim Curry, who is absolutely incapable of giving an unentertaining performance. And it's so hilarious watching this scene while growing up and slowly realizing just how sexual it is. And that's not me having a dirty mind. They literally spell it out for us.
I feel good, a special kind of horny.
Yep, he actually sings about how he's feeling horny. And while it wasn't in the movie, it was on the official soundtrack, I just love it so much. And that leads me to my problem. This introduction and song are so amazing, but we basically don't see Hexus again until the finale, which would maybe be fine if he remained the same horny beast, but he doesn't. Because for the entire final battle, Hexus gets almost no lines, and for the few he does, Tim Curry's voice is pitched so deeply, it's honestly hard to recognize. I get it, big scary monster, deeper voice, but this is just gilding the lily, and by gild, I mean shitting on. Come on, Ferngully, let your Tim Curry be as Tim Curry as possible. So yeah, that's my big problem with the villain. He starts off so good and just nosedives, but in addition to that, his whole deal makes very little sense. Going back to my whole character establishment thing being rushed and poorly thought out from the beginning, Hexus may be the worst example. So according to the opening, humans and fairies lived peacefully together in harmony with nature, then Hexus attacked while scaring the humans off and Magi trapped him in a tree. Given that the humans and fairies were living peacefully together until Hexus arrived, we can assume that humans didn't start building machines or polluting yet. So how did Hexus know anything about pollution and humans' ties to it if he's been in that tree for hundreds, if not thousands of years? Now, I do have some theories on this. Number one, if Hexus is the embodiment of destruction, there might be multiple Hexuses around the world, and they were the ones who fueled the Industrial Revolution and somehow, maybe operating through a hive mind, told the Ferngully Hexus about current events. Number two, those humans Hexus scared off in the first place started creating machines to fight the monster who attacked them before, but the original purpose just became a legend, so they just started polluting for the sake of polluting. Finally, three, and this is I think the one that holds the most weight, it's a kid's movie and I'm thinking way too hard about this. Yeah, that's probably it, but again, there are so many of these little inconsistencies that add up and just make the whole picture just a big mess, which all collide in this cluster F of a climax. For one, we have this god-awful lie reveal trope, followed by a very confusing ritual. So they reinforce the central tree home place by Magi casting a spell and giving her life force to the forest, I guess? Once again, nothing is explained. She's just the elderly mentor, so by the laws of screenwriting, she must die. And now Krista is the main magic person and needs to figure it out, but still, what makes her so special? Was she the only other one who could use magic? And if so, why didn't they just say that? But anyway, Hexus shows up, and luckily for our heroes, he's being powered completely through the machine, so turning it off defeats him. Makes enough sense, so how does he come back as that giant skeleton? I get that that was his first form before the smoke shape, but if he was getting all of his energy from the machine, how did he become even bigger after it was turned off? Where is that energy coming from? They very easily could have showed a couple of his tendrils fighting with Zack in the control room and turning the key back to on, but nope, just magic villain resurgence, no explanation. Although I will say, I do like the way he dies. If you think about it without the context, this is a pretty gruesome way to go. Anyone else seen Furiosa? If you know, you know. Although once again, it makes no sense how Krista comes back like this, but hey, magic, I guess. So, yeah, overall, this whole thing was pretty much a mess. Seems like all they had was a message they wanted to get across, and were more focused on that than making a cohesive and interesting story. As many people online have pointed out, this has very similar plot elements to Avatar, and I think, like Avatar, it's a bit up its own ass when it comes to the environmental message, while also not really holding up as a complete film on its own merit. But that's not to say there aren't bright spots. Toxic Love is a shining example. Some of the humor does work, while the accents don't match up. I do love the representation of Australian wildlife, and occasionally the animation can shine through. This opening, while in a completely different style, is really incredible. Honestly, I'd love to see a remake of this film completely in that style and with a darker tone. And probably my biggest thumbs up, the character designs. Not as much the main characters, but the extra fairies in the background. All these fairies have very unique designs and could have been mistaken for a main character in a lineup because of how much detail is in there. I was very surprised during the few scenes we saw them in how much emotion and creativity shone through. But that's about it when it comes to positives. I had fun reliving a few memories, but this is definitely not one I'll be watching again anytime soon. But you can bet everything you've got Toxic Love is getting added right now to my driving playlist. Tim Curry for life! And that's about it for this episode of Childhood Rewind. Thank you so much to all you lovely freaks for watching, and I'll see you next time with something else. See y'all later!